Nobody warns you that being 8 months pregnant feels like carrying a secret the whole world can see. Dominique Carter Kwan stood in her kitchen on a Tuesday evening, one hand pressed to the small of her back, the other resting on her stomach like she was holding something precious in place. Because she was. The Atlanta skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, indifferent and beautiful, and the house around her was the kind of quiet that costs serious money. Marble countertops, heated floors, rooms so large she still occasionally got mildly lost on the way to the kitchen. She grew up in Cincinnati, on Elberon Avenue, where the floors were cold and the walls were thin, and you learned to read trouble before it knocked. She had carried that instinct all the way into this beautiful, expensive, quiet life, and tonight, standing in her own kitchen with dinner getting warm on the counter, it was wide awake. Something was off. She couldn't name it. She just knew. The way Sojin had closed his laptop a half second too fast when she came home, the way his eyes did that scan of her face that wasn't just, "Are you okay?" but something underneath it. Something that looked almost like guilt. Her husband was many things. Subtle was not usually one of them, but tonight he was trying to be, and that alone was enough to make the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Kwon Sojin was upstairs now, on another call, doing what billionaires did at 7 in the evening. Running the world, eating instant ramen, pretending everything was fine. She ate her dinner slowly, listened to the house. Outside, Atlanta hummed and glittered like it always did, loud and alive and completely unbothered by whatever was brewing inside these walls. She went to bed with her notebook on the nightstand. Last entry before she closed her eyes, in her own handwriting, Sojin is keeping something. Figure out what. She fell asleep with her hand on her stomach. Downstairs, her husband stared at a message on his phone that had been sitting there for 3 days. 2 words. Unknown number. Watch Dae-soo. He locked the phone, put it face down, told himself he was handling it. He was not handling it. And across the city, in a dark office, a man who had been planning something for a very long time picked up his phone and made one final call. Tuesday, he said. Not before. Nobody in that house knew what Tuesday night was about to look like. But by Wednesday morning, everybody would. If you're lying in your bed right now, watching this just like me, tell me where you are watching from. And before you scroll, like and subscribe, because the next part, 5 men walk into the wrong garage, and the wrong woman is already awake. You are not ready. 2 years before that Tuesday night, Dominique Carter was a woman who had never been on a blind date in her life and intended to keep it that way. She had standards, not the impossible kind, the earned kind, the kind that came from watching her mother accept less than she deserved for too many years and deciding quietly and permanently that she would never do the same. She didn't need a rich man. She didn't need a perfect man. She needed a real one. And real ones, in her experience, were not found through setups arranged by overly optimistic Korean-American business partners named Mr. Lim. Mr. Lim had called her on a Wednesday afternoon and told her he wanted to introduce her to a very interesting professional who could open doors for her career. He used the word professional 4 times in one sentence. He mentioned the restaurant, Maison 44, one of the nicest in Atlanta, and told her to dress nicely, which she found slightly offensive, but let go. She showed up in a burgundy wrap dress and her good earrings because she was raised right, not because she was impressed. The moment she walked into that restaurant and saw the candle on the table, one single, romantic, completely unnecessary candle, she knew exactly what this was. She looked at Mr. Lim, who was smiling the smile of a man who believed in himself too much. Then, she looked at the man sitting across from him, and that man was looking at the candle like it had personally insulted him. He was handsome in an irritating way, the kind of handsome that knew it didn't need to try. Suit that cost more than her rent, posture so straight it looked architectural, and an expression on his face that she could only describe as a man watching his own house burn down and calculating the insurance value in real time. She almost turned around. Then their eyes met, and she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a "this is awkward" laugh, a real one, full and genuine and completely unglamorous, because the look on his face was the funniest thing she'd seen all week, and she had no intention of pretending otherwise. Kwon Sojin had been laughed at exactly 0 times in recent memory. His employees didn't laugh at him. His board didn't laugh at him. The last three women Mr. Lim had introduced him to had laughed with him, carefully, strategically, making sure he knew they found him charming. This woman laughed at him like she couldn't help it. He didn't know what to do with that. So he said the first true thing that came to mind. "You look like you also didn't agree to this." She wiped her eye. "You look like you're about to sue someone." "I am considering it." She laughed again. He didn't. But something behind his eyes moved, small and reluctant, like a door that had been locked a long time, hearing a key it didn't recognize yet. She sat down. Not because Mr. Lim asked her to, because she was curious now. The dinner was supposed to last 1 hour. It lasted 4. They argued about supply chain logistics with the energy of two people who genuinely cared about supply chain logistics, which should have been boring and was somehow electric. They disagreed loudly about a trade policy. They shared 3 plates of food without discussing it. It just happened naturally, the way things happen between people who are already comfortable with each other before they have any right to be. Somewhere in the 3rd hour, Seojin put down his chopsticks and said, completely without warning, "Everyone who talks to me wants something from me. You just talk to me." He said it like it was a line in a report, a simple observation. Fact stated. Moving on. Domi looked at him for a long moment. Then she slid the last dumpling onto his plate without a word. He ate it immediately. Mr. Lim, watching from the bar where he had quietly relocated 2 hours earlier, pumped his fist so hard he knocked over his drink. Seojin called him at 11 that night. 4 words, "Get me her number." Mr. Lim sent it before he even finished the sentence, because he had been holding it ready since 9 o'clock, fully confident in himself the entire time. Their first real date, Domi told him it was casual and let him show up in a full suit to a food truck event. She watched him stand there in charcoal gray among people in jeans and t-shirts and felt something warm move through her chest that she wasn't quite ready to name yet. He didn't complain once. He just loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and ordered from every truck in the row because he didn't know which ones she liked yet and wasn't willing to guess wrong. That was the moment, right there. Not the suit, not the money. The fact that he would rather do too much than risk getting it wrong for her. She was in trouble and she knew it. Your wedding and cry at your funeral and mean neither one. Kwon Dae-soo was that kind of person. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, and put together in the way that serious men are put together. Like every piece of him had been deliberately chosen and placed. He wore his suits the way other men wore armor. He spoke in measured sentences that never gave more than he intended. He had spent 15 years building KSJ Holdings from a regional family business into something that made boardrooms in Seoul pay attention. And he had done it with the cold, focused energy of a man who believed, genuinely, completely believed, that the company was his. Not because he was greedy. That's what made him dangerous. Because he had earned it. Or so he thought. He had sacrificed everything for that company. Marriages that didn't survive his schedule. Children who grew up seeing more of his assistant than of him. Health that he spent like currency and couldn't get back. He had given KSJ his best years, his sharpest thinking, his most ruthless decisions, and in return, he had assumed, the way you assume the sun will rise, that the company would one day officially be his. His brother never corrected that assumption. And then his brother got sick. And then his brother died. And in a lawyer's office on a gray Tuesday morning 6 years ago, Dae-soo sat in a good suit and listened to words that rearranged his entire understanding of his own life. The company went to Seojin, not to him, to a 30-year-old who had barely finished proving himself, to his nephew, to his brother's son, who had grown up watching Dae-soo run everything and had apparently impressed their father more in 3 years than Dae-soo had in 15. The letter his brother left him was gracious, warm even, full of gratitude and acknowledgement and love. It said Dae-soo had built something extraordinary. It said the company would not exist without him. It said Seojin needed his guidance and his wisdom going forward. What it did not say was, "This is yours." Dae-soo folded that letter very carefully, put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, stood up, and walked out of the office. He did not cry. He did not rage. He shook the lawyer's hand, nodded at his nephew, and got into his car. That stillness, that absolute unbroken stillness, was the most frightening thing anyone in that room had ever seen, and none of them fully understood why until years later. For 3 years after the funeral, Daisu played the devoted uncle. He attended every board meeting. He applauded every win. He offered guidance when asked and stepped back gracefully when he wasn't. He watched Seojin grow into the role, watched him exceed every projection, impress every partner, turn KSJ into something even their father hadn't imagined. And he smiled and nodded and quietly, methodically began building something of his own. Not a company, a plan. He cultivated board members who owed him favors. He moved small amounts of influence like chess pieces. Slowly, carefully, nothing traceable. He told himself he was simply protecting his interests. He told himself he was owed this. He told himself a lot of things in the dark of his office after everyone else had gone home. Then Sojin met Domi. Daesu had watched his nephew date before. Carefully chosen women from appropriate families, relationships that lasted a year or two and ended quietly. He had never worried about any of them. They were manageable. They understood the world they were entering and the unspoken rules that came with it. Domi Carter understood none of those rules. And what was worse, she didn't care to learn them. The first time Daesu met her was at a dinner he hosted at his own house. He had prepared for the meeting the way he prepared for everything, researched her background, assessed her position, decided in advance how to make her feel subtly, politely, permanently unwelcome. He was good at that. He had done it to 3 other women in Seojin's life without any of them realizing it was happening. Domi realized it was happening within approximately 4 minutes. She sat at his table and ate his food and complimented what genuinely deserved complimenting and left everything else alone. She was warm to the staff. She asked Daesu questions about the company's early years that were so specific and intelligent he had to actually think before answering, which he had not expected and did not appreciate. And then he made his move, a comment smooth as silk about the importance of understanding Korean customs when entering a Korean family. Polite on the surface, a warning underneath. Domi smiled at him. The full, warm, unhurried smile of a woman who had grown up reading exactly this kind of person on exactly this kind of porch. I adjust to good people, she said sweetly. I don't really adjust to bad manners, but thank you for the tip. The table went very quiet. Seojin, beside her, nearly choked on his soup. Daesu's smile didn't move, but his eyes went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. He looked at her, really looked at her, and understood something that changed everything. This woman was not going to be managed. She was not going to shrink. She was not going to be quietly discouraged or slowly isolated or politely frozen out. She had come from a place that had tried harder than he ever could to break her, and she had come out of it sharper. She saw him. Not the silver hair, not the good suit, not the gracious uncle performance. She saw the thing underneath it, the cold and calculated thing, and she was not afraid of it, which meant she was not just a wife. She was a wall between him and everything he still wanted. The pregnancy made it a fortress, and heir meant Seojin's line was secured. It meant the company, through death, divorce, or any of the carefully constructed scenarios Daesu had been turning over for 5 years, would never come back to him. The last door had just closed. He could hear it in the silence of his own office that night. Sitting alone with a glass of whiskey he didn't taste and a photograph of his brother he no longer wanted to look at. He had been patient for 3 years. He was done being patient. He made a call, then another, and then one final call to a man who knew people who did things that couldn't be put in writing. He asked 2 questions. Are they discreet? Are they effective? The answer to both, he was told, was yes. The answer to both was a lie. But Daesu was too arrogant to ask the right follow-up questions and too far gone to turn back now. Tuesday was coming, and he was ready. What he was not ready for, what he had never once factored into any version of his careful, calculated plan, was a woman in house slippers who grew up on Elbron Avenue and learned a long time ago that you do not wait for trouble to finish knocking. You open the door first. The planning meeting was held around a fold-out table in a small apartment that smelled like instant noodles and bad decisions. Big Ryu had printed a dossier, an actual, physical printed dossier, 12 pages, stapled, with a cover sheet that said Operation Tuesday in bold letters. He had also acquired a laser pointer. Nobody knew where the laser pointer came from. Nobody asked. He clicked it on and aimed it at a hand-drawn diagram of the estate garage taped to the wall behind him, and immediately shone it directly into the eye of the man to his left for a full 4 seconds before adjusting. The man blinked, said nothing. He still wasn't entirely sure this was not a moving job. The diagram was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally, structurally, from the ground up wrong, in a way that suggested Big Ryu had never actually seen the garage, and had drawn it from a description he half remembered from a phone call he hadn't been fully paying attention to. The exit route he had marked with a bold red arrow led directly into what was, in reality, a garden wall. The entry point he had labeled Point A was actually a window that hadn't opened since 2019. Nobody caught any of this. Big Ryu moved the laser pointer across the diagram with the full authority of a man presenting to a Fortune 500 board. He used the word protocol 4 times. He talked about timing, positioning, and what he called the element of surprise, with such confidence that for a brief, fragile moment, it almost sounded like a real plan. Then the question started. What if someone gets hurt? Big Ryu, that's the point. Right. But what if we get hurt? Silence. Big Ryu clicked the laser pointer off and on twice like that would help. It did not help. He moved on without answering because there was no answer, and he had learned long ago that momentum was more useful than honesty. They left the apartment at 9:45. 5 men in dark clothing walking with the concentrated purpose of people who had watched too many crime movies and absorbed all the wrong lessons. The getaway driver sat in the car, rehearsing an internal moral debate so detailed and well-reasoned it genuinely deserved a live audience. He had been having this debate for 3 weeks. He kept losing it to himself, and then the new apartment would come back to mind, and then he would feel worse about the apartment than he had before, which was not helping anyone. They arrived at the estate at 10:15, parked down the street, sat in the dark for several minutes doing what Big Ryu called building focus, and what was, in practical terms, 5 men staring at a dashboard, not saying the things they were all thinking. Then they moved and stopped in front of the wrong house. It belonged to a retired couple who had lived on that street for 22 years and were, at that precise moment, watching their Tuesday night television program in complete peace. The husband heard something outside, looked through the window, saw 5 nervous men standing in front of his garage, opened the door in his bathrobe with the energy of a man who had been waiting years for someone to finally answer for a long-running lawn dispute with his neighbor 3 houses down. What followed was 11 minutes of the most agonizing mistaken identity conversation the city of Atlanta had ever quietly witnessed. The retired man talked about the lawn. Big Ryu tried to leave. The man kept talking about the lawn. One of the 5, the largest one, apologized 4 separate times without being entirely sure what he was apologizing for. Another one, the one with the conscience that had been causing problems since the planning meeting, asked the man sincerely if he needed any help with anything, which was genuinely the most useless thing anyone had said all evening. They got back to the car. Smooth, said Big Ryu. 3 people looked at him. Nobody spoke. 20 minutes and 1 corrected address later, they finally found the right garage. The light inside glowing soft and yellow through the gap in the side door. And through that gap, visible, unbothered, completely unaware, Kwon So-jin sat on the hood of a car in his pajamas, eating instant ramen and reading a quarterly report like a man without a single enemy in the world. Big Ryu raised his hand for the signal. What none of them saw, what not one of them thought to check, was the figure moving quietly through the house, coming down the hallway toward that same door. House slippers, silk bonnet, slightly tilted, half a bag of chips. The side door opened and 5 men slipped into the garage like they owned it. They did not own it. For the first 90 seconds, they had the advantage, and even then, barely. They surrounded So-jin on the hood of the car before he could move, before he could think, before the quarterly report had even hit the floor. 5 men in dark clothing, closing in from every angle, and to his credit, So-jin did not panic. He went very still the way intelligent people go still when they are outnumbered, not frozen, just calculating. Reading the room, buying time. Big Ryu stepped forward and delivered his opening speech. He had rehearsed it. You could tell he had rehearsed it because he was using a voice that was not his natural voice, lower, slower, more menacing. the voice of a man performing a version of himself he had practiced in a bathroom mirror. He talked about consequences. He talked about what happened to people who couldn't be reasoned with. He pointed at Seojin with a finger that was supposed to communicate authority. Seojin looked at the finger, then at Big Ryu, with the specific, deeply personal expression of a man who was not scared but was genuinely privately offended at the quality of what had shown up in his garage. Then he saw the fifth man pressed against the wall near the door. Recognized him immediately. Jong-ho. One word. Quiet. Calm. The kind of calm that is worse than shouting. Jong-ho's soul left his body and did not immediately return. Big Ryu kept talking. Seojin stopped listening to Big Ryu. He was looking at Jong-ho with an expression that said, without any words at all, that this conversation was not over, that there would be a full accounting, and that the new apartment Jong-ho had been promised was not going to feel worth it. And then the side door opened again. Everyone turned. Domi stood in the doorway. She took in the scene in exactly 2 seconds, the way she always took in rooms. Fast, complete, nothing missed. 5 men. Her husband surrounded on the hood of a car. The quarterly report on the floor. The ramen tipped over. Seojin's face, which was doing something she had never seen it do before, not fear exactly, but the thing adjacent to it that proud men feel when they are caught in a situation they cannot immediately control. 1 beat of complete silence. Domi looked at the 5 men. Then she looked at her chips. Then she stepped fully into the garage, walked calmly to the nearest car, and set the chip bag down on the hood with the careful, deliberate energy of a woman who did not want them to spill. Then she turned around. Y'all really picked tonight. It was not a question. What happened next would be talked about for the rest of their lives by the people in that garage, by the police officers who took the statements afterward, by the lawyer who would later describe it in a courtroom with a straight face, while 3 jurors struggled visibly to maintain theirs. Domi was not superhuman. She was not a movie character. She was a 32-year-old woman who was 8 months pregnant and had grown up on a street that did not allow you the luxury of waiting to see what happened next. She was fast. She was strategic. And she was so completely, terrifyingly unafraid that it disrupted something fundamental in every man in that room. The first one came toward her and made it approximately 3 steps before she moved. Sharp, precise, the kind of movement that had no wasted motion in it. And he went down hard enough that the sound echoed off the concrete floor. The second one hesitated. That hesitation cost him everything. The third one, the largest, most physically imposing one, took 1 step forward, made the mistake of meeting her eyes directly, and stopped. Just stopped. Something in him short-circuited completely. He opened his mouth. Ma'am, She didn't wait for the rest of the sentence. Then the sneezing started. It came from the back of the group. Sudden, violent, completely uncontrollable. One of the 5 had discovered, at the worst possible moment, that he was catastrophically allergic to something in that garage. Motor oil, rubber, the specific combination of both. He sneezed so hard he walked into the man next to him, who stumbled sideways into a metal shelving unit, which came down with a crash that shook the walls and sent tools scattering across the concrete floor like a percussion section joining the chaos uninvited. Big Ryu spun around at the noise. The laser pointer fell out of his pocket. He looked at it on the floor. He made the catastrophic decision to reach for it. That was when Domi got hold of the torque wrench. She took it off the wall rack without looking, knew exactly where it was because she had watched Seojin reorganize that wall 17 times and had made fun of him for it every single time. And now she was grateful for every obsessive, label-forward, everything in its place tendency her husband possessed. The moment the torque wrench came off the wall, the energy in the room changed. Not funny anymore. Not chaotic. Just real. This was a woman who had her husband behind her and her unborn child inside her, and a torque wrench in her hand, and absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone in that garage. Her eyes went around the room, one face to the next, and what they found in her expression made every remaining calculation they had evaporate completely. They folded, one by one, fast. And when the last man went down, Domi stood in the middle of the garage and let the silence settle around her like it belonged to her, because it did. The adrenaline was still running hot. Her breathing was up, her hand on the torque wrench was steady. Then Seojin stepped over Big Ryu, walked straight to her, put both hands on her face, not romantic, Not careful, just urgent. Checking her the way you check something you cannot afford to lose. Her eyes, her face, her hands. The quarterly report was somewhere on the floor behind him. The ramen was gone. None of it existed. His voice, for the first time in the entire night, was not composed. Are you hurt? She shook her head, looked at the 5 men arranged across her garage floor in various states of regret, looked back at him. Seojin. Yes. Who sent them? Not a question. A door opening, and she could tell from the way he went very still from the half second before his eyes came back to hers that he already knew, had already known, had been carrying it around for 3 days in the pocket of his pajama pants like a secret he hadn't decided what to do with yet. The love in her face didn't go anywhere, but something moved through it. Something that had a name, and the name was, "We are going to have a very long conversation about this." Jong-ho, still pressed against the wall, raised his hand slightly. "I'm so sorry," he said. In English, and then in Korean, just to be thorough. Nobody acknowledged him. But Domi, without looking away from her husband's face, reached over and picked her chips back up off the hood of the car. She had earned them. By 11 o'clock, the garage looked like a crime scene, because it was a crime scene. 3 of the 5 men were zip-tied to various fixtures using zip ties from Seojin's toolbox. He bought everything in bulk, a habit Domi had made fun of extensively and was now privately deeply grateful for. The 4th was sitting on the floor with his knees pulled to his chest, sneezing at intervals that had slowed from catastrophic to merely miserable. The 5th, Jong-ho, was pressed against the wall, writing what appeared to be a personal confession letter using a pen he had found in his own jacket pocket. He was on the 2nd page. He had neat handwriting. Under different circumstances, this would have been almost impressive. The police arrived at 11:17. 2 officers first, then 2 more, then a detective who walked into the garage, looked at the full scene, looked at Domi, 8 months pregnant, house slippers, silk bonnet, torque wrench still on the workbench behind her, and then looked at his notepad for a long moment before writing anything down. Statements were taken. Evidence was photographed. One officer spent 4 minutes trying to understand the sneezing man's account of events and eventually wrote "incapacitated upon entry" and moved on. Another officer found the printed dossier that had fallen out of Big Ryu's jacket and read the cover sheet, Operation Tuesday, with an expression that moved slowly from professional neutrality to something he had to actively manage. Through all of it, Domi sat on the hood of the car, the same hood Seojin had been sitting on when everything started. She had a bottle of water someone had brought her, her chips, and the particular stillness of a woman who has been through something significant and is currently deciding how she feels about all of it. The baby was moving. Had been moving since the confrontation, restless and active, apparently having opinions about the evening's events. "I know," Domi said quietly, pressing her hand to her stomach. "Me too." Sojin stayed close to her the entire time. Not hovering, he knew better than to hover, but positioned. Present. Every time someone needed to ask her a question, he was within arm's reach, and every time there was a pause in the process, his eyes went straight to her face to check what only he knew how to read there. She let him. For now. After the men were taken out and the detective had everything he needed and the garage had been documented from every angle, Seojin and Domi were alone for the first time since the side door had opened. The garage was quiet. The tools were back on the wall. The zip ties were gone. The ramen was still on the floor because nobody had dealt with it, and somehow that was the detail that made the whole night feel most real. One overturned cup of instant noodles on a concrete floor that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. Seojin picked it up, threw it away, came back and stood in front of her. She looked at him. He sat down on the hood of the car beside her. Something he'd never done before because he always sat alone out here in the dark with his reports. And he told her everything. The anonymous message. 3 days ago, unknown number. 2 words. Watch Daesu. He had dismissed it initially as a disgruntled employee, a competitor, someone trying to create noise. Then he had started thinking about it. Then he had started watching. And what he had noticed, small things, a pattern in the edges of his uncle's behavior, a board member who had stopped returning calls the way he used to, had told him the message was not noise. He had not told her. He had not told her because she was 8 months pregnant and exhausted, and he had told himself he was protecting her, and he had believed that right up until the moment 5 men walked into his garage and his wife dealt with all of them in house slippers while he was still calculating his next move. He said all of this without flinching, because that was who Seojin was. He did not dress things up, did not soften edges that didn't deserve softening. He had made a decision. It had been the wrong decision. He said so directly. Domi listened to every word. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, the slow, deliberate nod of a woman conducting a performance review in real time. So you got a warning? Yes. 3 days ago? Yes. And you said nothing. I didn't want to stress me. Yes. She looked at him. He looked back at her. He knew this look. This was not the angry look he could work with, could respond to, could meet with logic and direction. This was the worse one, the calm one. The one that meant she was seeing him completely clearly and making a full assessment, and he was just going to have to stand in it until she was done. Seojin? Yes. I just zip-tied 3 men to your toolbox, in-house slippers, while 8 months pregnant. A pause. I see your point, he said. Do you? Yes. Good. She reached into her chip bag, because next time, and there will not be a next time, but if there were, you tell me. Same day, immediately. You do not protect me from information. You protect me with it. Are we clear? We are clear. Say it like you mean it. We are very clear. She ate a chip. He watched her eat it. Something in his chest that had been wound tight since the moment those men walked in finally, slowly, began to loosen. I'm going to find out who sent that warning, he said, and I'm going to deal with Dae-soo. I know you are. She looked at him sideways. But Seojin? Yes. I'm dealing with him too. He opened his mouth. She raised one finger. He closed it. Later that night, long after the statements and the police and the chaos had cleared, Domi finally got back into bed. The house was quiet in a different way now. Not the expensive, curated quiet of before, but something rawer and more real. The quiet of a place that had been tested and was still standing. Seojin sat on the edge of the bed beside her. He didn't sleep. She knew he wouldn't. She reached over without opening her eyes and found his hand in the dark and placed it on her stomach. The baby moved immediately, strong and sure, like a punctuation mark. He went completely still, feeling it. The most important thing in the world, right there under his hand. We're going to be okay, Domi said. He didn't answer right away, but his jaw set in the dark. That quiet, decisive set that meant a conclusion had been reached, a line had been drawn, and whatever came next was going to find him ready. Yes, he said finally, we are. On the floor by the bed, in Domi's handwriting, the notebook was open to a new entry. It said simply, Dae-soo's turn. Kwon Dae-soo woke up on Wednesday morning and made himself coffee the way he did every morning. Precise, unhurried, 2 sugars. The ritual of a man who believed that control over small things preserved control over large ones. He checked his phone. Nothing from his contact. He wasn't worried. No news before noon was normal. These things took time to confirm, time to clean up, time for the right story to settle into place before anyone started asking questions. He had planned for this. He had planned for everything. He showered, dressed, put on the good suit, not the best one, that was for celebrations, and he was not celebrating yet, and sat down at his desk with his coffee and the morning's financial news and the quiet, private satisfaction of a man who believed he had finally moved the right piece on the board. His phone rang at 10:43. He answered on the second ring. What he heard on the other end of that call did something to his face that the good suit could not fix. The crew had been arrested. All 5. One of them, the driver, Jong-ho, the one Dae-soo had considered his most controllable piece, had begun cooperating with police before sunrise. Not reluctantly, enthusiastically, with documentation. Dae-soo set his coffee cup down, parallel to the edge of the desk the way he always set things down. Precise. Controlled. All 5, he said. Yes, the voice on the phone said. All 5. He ended the call. Sat very still for a moment. Then he opened his laptop and made 3 calls of his own, to his lawyer first, then to a board member who owed him a significant favor, then to a man whose entire professional value was the ability to build legal distance between a decision and the person who made it. Because Dae-soo had not built 15 years of corporate power without understanding one fundamental truth, that the difference between a mistake and a catastrophe was almost always preparation. He had layers. Careful, constructed, deliberately maintained layers of plausible deniability that had been put in place months before Tuesday ever arrived. Direct charges would be difficult. The connection between him and five men in a garage would take time to establish, time to prove, time that he intended to use. He was not panicking. What he had not prepared for, what existed in no version of his careful planning, was Domi. She showed up at the first event 3 days after the garage, a charity dinner that Daesu attended every year, a fixture on the Korean American business community calendar, the kind of evening where the food was excellent and the conversations were worth more than the food. He arrived at 7, nodded at the right people, accepted a glass of wine, and turned around. And there she was, Dominique Carter Kwan, 8 months pregnant, wearing a deep green dress that was doing everything it was supposed to do, glowing in the specific, infuriating way that some women glowed in the final stretch of pregnancy, like their body had decided that thriving was the best possible revenge. Her hair was up. Her earrings were significant. She was standing in the middle of the room talking to the wife of a board member and laughing at something the woman had said, and the laugh was real and warm, and the board member's wife was visibly delighted by it. Daesu watched her for a moment. Then she turned, unhurried, natural, as if she had simply felt the direction, and found his eyes across the room, and smiled. Not a small smile. Not a polite, social, this is a public event smile. A full, warm, completely knowing smile. The smile of a woman who knew exactly what she knew and wanted him to know that she knew it, delivered with such grace and pleasantness that nobody watching would have read anything in it at all. Nobody except him. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he looked away first. He had not looked away first from anything in 11 years. She was at every event after that, every board-adjacent dinner, every community function, every gathering where Daesu's presence was expected and his network was visible, always glowing, always composed, always finding his eyes at some point in the evening with that same smile that cost her nothing and cost him something he couldn't quantify. But the smile was only the surface. Underneath it, Domi was working. She did it the way she did everything, not loudly, not with performance, just consistently and completely. She genuinely befriended people. That was the foundation of it, and it worked because it wasn't a strategy pretending to be friendship. It was actual friendship that happened to be strategically valuable. She was warm and funny and remembered details about people that made them feel seen. And within 2 weeks, she had built more genuine goodwill in Seojin's business community than Daesu had manufactured in 5 years of calculated networking. She befriended Daesu's personal assistant, a quiet, overlooked woman named Nara, who had worked for him for 6 years and been thanked for it exactly twice. Domi asked her about her life, remembered what she said, asked follow-up questions the next time she saw her. Within 3 conversations, completely organically, she knew Daesu's full weekly schedule, his personal allergies, the names of his preferred lawyers, and the fact that he had a standing lunch every Thursday with the one board member whose vote mattered most in any challenge to Seojin's position. She sat in on company briefings. Seojin had offered, she had accepted, and then absorbed everything with the focused, permanent retention of someone who had always had to understand situations completely to survive them. Numbers, structures, names, relationships, the architecture of the company and where Daesu's fingerprints still lived inside it. She said nothing against him directly. Not once. She didn't have to. She simply became, visibly, undeniably, someone who understood this world completely and was not going anywhere. Daesu's allies on the board began looking at her differently, not because she had campaigned for their attention, because she had earned it without appearing to try, which was infinitely more effective and infinitely harder to counter. Seojin found out about the parallel campaign on a Thursday evening when Nara mentioned something to him that could only have come from a conversation with Domi. He went home, found his wife on the couch with her feet up and a business report open on her lap. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You've been building a network," he said. She turned a page. "I've been making friends. In very specific places. I like specific people." He looked at her for a long moment. 5 different expressions moved across his face in 4 seconds, something that almost never happened to Seojin, whose face was normally a masterclass in professional stillness. "Is there anything you need from me?" he asked finally. She thought about it genuinely. Another bag of those chips. He bought them in bulk the next morning, 3 bags, because this was his language, and she had become fluent in it, and he wanted her to know he was paying attention. Meanwhile, across the city, Dae-soo sat in his office and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific discomfort of a man who had miscalculated something important. He had moved against Seo-jin. He had expected Seo-jin to respond. He had not expected her. And that, more than anything that had happened in that garage on Tuesday night, told him that he had made a much larger mistake than he realized. Jong-ho's cooperation with the investigation was not reluctant. It was not slow. It was not partial. It was not the careful, calculated cooperation of a man giving the minimum required to secure the best deal. It was the full, immediate, deeply relieved cooperation of a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally, gratefully, put it down. He gave them everything. Names, dates, transaction records he had photographed on his personal phone, not because he had planned to use them, but because some instinct in him had said, document this on the night Dae-soo made his offer, and he had listened to that instinct without fully understanding why. He gave them a voice note, 43 seconds of audio recorded in the back of a car 3 weeks before Tuesday, in which Dae-soo's voice, measured, controlled, unmistakably his, outlined the shape of what he wanted done without ever quite saying it in words that could be taken individually and made to mean something innocent. 43 seconds. Dae-soo had spent 15 years building walls. Jong-ho had spent 43 seconds recording the thing that would eventually bring them down. He cried through the entire deposition, not performatively, genuinely, steadily, the way people cry when they are ashamed and relieved in equal measure, and neither feeling will wait for the other to finish. His lawyer had to pause the session 3 times. The detective conducting the interview kept a box of tissues on the table and said nothing about them, which Jong-ho appreciated more than he could express. At the end of the deposition, Jong-ho asked, quietly, formally, like a man submitting a request through proper channels, whether it would be possible for someone to pass on his personal apology to Mrs. Carter-Kwan. The detective said he could not facilitate that. Jong-ho went home and wrote the letter anyway. It was 4 pages long, handwritten. It had a table of contents. The first section covered the garage. The second covered his general conduct in the weeks leading up to Tuesday. The third, titled, in Jong-ho's careful handwriting, Things I Should Have Done Differently, was the longest section and contained 14 numbered points, the 7th of which was an apology for arriving 3 minutes late to work on a Tuesday in October 2023 that had always bothered him and felt like the right time to address. Domi read the entire letter at the kitchen table on a Friday morning with her coffee. Seo-jin watched her read it from across the counter. When she finished, she folded it carefully and set it down. I feel bad for him, she said. Seo-jin put his coffee cup down. He helped plan an attack on you. He also apologized for a late arrival in 2023, in writing, with a number system. She tapped the letter. He's not a bad person, Seo-jin. He's weak. There's a difference. Seo-jin looked at the letter, then at his wife. He had no response to this because she was right, which was a condition he had learned to identify quickly and accept without prolonged resistance. The board moved against Dae-soo on a Thursday afternoon, not slowly, not with deliberation or committee and extended discussion. These were business people, and business people did not linger in the presence of liability. The moment the evidence became known to the right people, and Seo-jin had made sure it became known to the right people, quietly, completely, in the way he did everything that mattered, the calculation was instant and unanimous. Dae-soo's remaining advisory position was removed. His access card stopped working at 4:47 p.m. His parking space was reassigned by 5 o'clock. His name was removed from the directory with an efficiency that suggested someone had been ready to do it for a while and had simply been waiting for the reason. 15 years of building, gone in an afternoon. Not with a fight, not with drama. Just the quiet, mechanical ruthlessness of a system protecting itself, which was, in its own way, more final than anything louder would have been. Seo-jin met his uncle privately before the formal legal proceedings moved into their next phase. He chose the conference room on the 14th floor, not his office, not anywhere that belonged to either of them personally, just a neutral room with good light and a long table and no history between them. He arrived first. He did not bring lawyers. He did not bring documentation. He brought himself and the knowledge of everything, and the decision he had already made about how this conversation would go. Daesu arrived 7 minutes later, still in the good suit, still composed, still silver-haired, still carrying himself with the precision of a man who had not yet fully accepted the dimensions of what was happening to him. He sat down across from his nephew and said nothing, waiting. Sojin looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, without theater, the way he said everything that was completely true, "My father trusted you for 30 years. I trusted you for 3 more. You could have come to me. You could have told me you were struggling with the transition, with the role, with any of it. I would have found something for you. Not because you deserved it after what you'd done, because you were family, and I believed in that." Daesu's jaw moved slightly. Nothing else. "You sent men to my home," Sojin continued. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it, something that had been controlled all the way through, all week, all the nights of sitting on the edge of the bed with his hand on his wife's stomach, tightened. Just once, just enough to hear. "To my wife, to my child, while she was 8 months pregnant, in our garage." The room was completely still. "We're done," Seojin said. He stood, straightened his jacket with 2 precise movements, and walked out. The door closed behind him, not slammed, not theatrical, just closed. Final and quiet and absolute, the way the best endings always were. Daesu sat alone in the room. For the first time in as long as he could remember, there was nothing running behind his eyes. No angles, no calculations, no next move assembling itself in the back of his mind while the front of it managed the present. Just a man, sitting in a room, in a suit that no longer meant what it used to mean. With the full weight of every choice he had made settling around him like something that had always been coming and had finally arrived. The grief from that lawyer's office 6 years ago, the grief he had folded up and put away and converted into fuel for everything that came after, was back. It was bigger now, because now it had company. He did not reach for his phone, he did not call his lawyer, he did not begin constructing the next layer of defense. He just sat, and outside that conference room, in the elevator going down, Kwon Sojin stood with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the numbers above the door and allowed himself, for exactly the duration of 14 floors, to feel everything he had not let himself feel all week. Then the doors opened. He walked out and went home to his wife. Justice, when it finally came, was not loud. It never is, for people who planned carefully and fell anyway. The charges against Daesu moved through the legal system with the quiet, grinding momentum of something that had too much evidence behind it to be stopped, and too much documentation to be spun. His lawyers were good. They were not good enough. Jong-ho's voice note alone had done damage that no amount of legal architecture could fully repair, and the financial records and the testimony and the 43 seconds of audio combined into something that left very little room for interpretation. The 5 men received their own accounting. Big Ryu's statement to police managed to be simultaneously incriminating and self-aggrandizing, which his lawyer found deeply unhelpful. The sneezing man's legal team argued his garage allergy had rendered him temporarily incapacitated and therefore not fully culpable. The judge's expression during that argument was something the court reporter would describe to her family for years. Muscles submitted a written statement describing Domi as the most simultaneously terrifying and impressive person he had ever encountered in his life, and formally requested that if anyone passed his apology letter to her, she please not reply in person. The detective processing the statement left the room for 2 minutes. He came back with red eyes and blamed allergies. Jong-ho received a reduced charge. He had earned it. And 3 weeks after the sentencing, a letter arrived at his apartment with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a professional reference letter, thorough, specific, genuinely warm, signed by Dominique Carter Kwon. Seojin found out the same evening. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his wife for a long moment. He helped plan. He's on his 4th job interview, Domi said, and his mother is sick. I Googled him. You Googled him. I Google everyone. A pause. Even me? Especially you. Still married you. He had absolutely nothing to say to that, so he said nothing, which was the correct answer. The baby arrived on a Wednesday morning at 6:14 a.m. and announced herself. Sojin had been right. It was a she, a fact Domi was not going to let go of for the foreseeable future, with the kind of volume that suggested she had inherited her mother's complete absence of hesitation. Sojin held her first, and the man who ran a multi-billion-dollar company, who had sat across from his uncle and ended 15 years of family in 4 sentences, who had never once in his professional life let anyone see anything he wasn't ready to show, came completely undone. Not loudly, just completely. His face opened in a way it almost never did. Every layer of composure gone, and what was underneath it was so simple and so enormous that Domi had to look away for a second because it was almost too much to witness. She looked back. "Hey," she said softly. He looked up. "Next time something feels wrong, you tell me. Same day, immediately. We handle things together." He looked at her, then at the baby, then back. "Okay," he said, like a contract, like the most binding thing he had ever signed. 3 days later, Domi carried their daughter into the garage. Clean now. Quiet. Tools back on the wall, labels forward, everything in its place. Seojin was already there, standing in the middle of the space, hands in his pockets, looking at the floor where the ramen had spilled and the walls where the shelving unit had crashed and the spot near the door where 5 men had walked in and deeply regretted it. She stood next to him, the three of them in the clean, still garage. "We should put a plaque here," Domi said. "A plaque. Commemorating the night I saved your life in house slippers. I was handling it. Sojin, you were eating ramen on the hood of a car. I was handling it quietly." She laughed. The real one, full and genuine and completely unglamorous. The baby stirred at the sound, turning her tiny head toward her mother's voice like it was the most important thing in the world, which it was. Sojin looked at his daughter, then at his wife, then at the garage that had tried to take everything from him and had instead somehow given him the clearest possible picture of exactly what he had. And for only the second time in the entire story, surprised by it, undone by it, he laughed too, short and real and completely his. The garage held all three of them. Everything that had tried to break them, behind them. Everything ahead, unnamed and wide open in theirs.